Hi, and welcome to this episode of our Rev Signal podcast. My name is Aseem Chandra. I'm the host for this podcast and also co-founder and CEO at Immersa.ai. My guest today is Tierney Didier. She is the global go-to-market and senior director of revenue operations and analytics at LivePerson, and has previously worked at Twilio and Salesforce and has pretty extensive background in the area of the conversation today, which is how are revenue operations teams starting to use data and analytics to drive their business. So without further ado, let me introduce Tierney. Tierney, please take a moment to say hello to the audience and share a little bit about the company that you work with.
Great. Yes. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Tierney Didier. I currently work at LivePerson. Like Aseem said, I am running their sales operations, which is very inclusive of all revenue streams, and analytics. And the analytics portion is very near and dear to my heart as I just love data. I am still the type of person that wants it to be digestible when I'm looking at the data. And so that's something that we're constantly striving for, to make it easy for people that aren't looking at data every day to be able to easily understand what they're looking at and then how to impact it either for a good change or something that we need to course correct.
Yeah, great. And Tierney, tell us a little bit about LivePerson. I know you're in the conversational AI space.
Yep.
The space, of course, is exploding with the innovations that have occurred over the past year. What does your company do? What are the specific types of use cases that you work with? Who are some of your customers that you solve them for?
For sure. Yes. So like you said, we're in the conversational AI space. We've been in business for over 25 years. We really tap into, and it goes by the name LivePerson. I think most people would have pain around when they get into a chatbot or they call a customer service line and they have automation that is really not solving their problems. And LivePerson really takes that conversation and makes it specific to the individual that's calling in. And we have a great framework to do that. We have an amazing product team that really keeps that in mind as they're building out new products, new features to really, at the end of the day, keep the customer first for our, customers. So they are breaking into new spaces with obviously the introduction of LLMs, which is basically putting our product on steroids and making it that much better. And so we're just continuing to grow with our customers, and we primarily play in the enterprise space. So we have the customers like Disney and Chipotle is the big one we talk about a lot, that we just continue to evolve with and pave the way to make sure that their customers are first and that they have a good experience with the brand.
Great. Awesome. So I see we have a few guests that have joined today. If you're joining us for the first time, we like to keep this very interactive. If you have questions of us, of our guest, please raise your hand and drop your questions in our chat pod here in the webinar chat, and I'll bring them up into the conversation. If you'd like to engage in some way live, we can open up the lines to you and have you engage with us as well. So, but thank you for joining us today, and look forward to learning more about who the folks are on the call. So just let us know where you're joining from and what your role is. Okay, great. So Tierney, coming back to the discussion around LivePerson and conversational AI, you mentioned LLMs and how that's led to a complete explosion of opportunity in this space and changed the game. The other shift that we're seeing is revenue teams starting to think in terms of the use of data to drive revenue operations. And historically, if you think about the RevOps role, I mean, you were at Salesforce, like Salesforce literally invented the role in the industry. And it started out with, you need somebody to kind of manage and administer the Salesforce application. But obviously, it's grown way beyond that since then. So can you share a little bit about what that transformation looks like and why data is starting to become so much more important in the context of this role?
Yep. So I think it really stems from, it kind of started where we had, sales operations that had sales admins that was more working in the systems. And then you had, project managers or program managers that were really the right hands to go to market. And they were figuring out how to tap into the various things that the operational teams and technical teams were working on to be able to surface up direction and guidance to go to market leaders, specifically in sales. And I think as it evolved, and I saw this evolution at Salesforce, was they started putting those two together. So my last role at Salesforce was, I had a team of analysts that was specifically creating, data points and metrics to provide to program managers. So then the program managers had analysts that were surfacing it up to the sales leaders. And so we were doing all of this work to just specifically tap into the data points that sales leaders wanted to see. And so it evolves from that, where we're bringing in people that have that technical and systems thinking to also having a really good viewpoint of what does the field and the go-to-market team need to be successful. And that successful always starts with data. And then their insight on that really drives action. And that action can be, more strategic in terms of how we're going to market, or it can be something that we've noticed as a gap within internally in terms of process, et cetera, to drive efficiency, to, align teams, but ultimately start the conversation to make sure that we're working on the same things and we're driving revenue for the company.
Got it. Great. And as the role has evolved and sort of starting to focus more on the use of data, use of analytics, et cetera, how are you seeing teams evolve around that? Obviously, I mean, you've been part of those transformations. You embrace that approach. Tell us a little bit about how are the different parts of your organization are involved in working with revenue ops to solve the data and analytics issues?
I think a lot of it is it's understanding the business. It's understanding what our go-to-market leaders want and need to see on a certain frequency. And then also from a revenues operation standpoint is helping them and guide them with what that data means and some of the whys. Sometimes there can be blimps in the data where there's a big deal that closed and it's going to skyrocket a win rate. And so being able to take out some of that and provide that context into like the whys. Oh, this actually looks good, but in reality, it's this one deal that's driving this. We are still seeing a gap in our new logo conversion rates, as you can see from trend lines. And to me, the important part with that is also tying target to a lot of our metrics and historical data. So if you're just providing data, people don't know, is that good? Is that bad? Like where should we be? And so making sure that the data, you can trust the data, but also being able to say, is this good? Is this bad? And what does this historically look like? And where should we be trending is really important. And in order to do that, you have to partner with a lot of people to get that done. And that's really where revenue operations came into play, because those were working in silos. You had someone that was just, here's the data. And then it was up to whoever wanted to see it to really like go in and understand it. And that takes a lot of time. And they don't sometimes have the full picture based on, who they're working with cross-functionally. But if you're having to align with marketing, and sales development and of course sales on targets, then you have the whole picture of how the full revenue engine should be working to understand where things are at today and where they should be, or where we're succeeding, or where we might have an upcoming problem.
Got it. Okay, so you covered a lot of ground there. So I want to double click on collaborating with other teams on data. And I think you made a really important point there, which is establish trust in the data. So maybe let's start there first.
Sure.
Let's talk about that for a moment, because I'm curious to hear when you say establish trust in the data, I assume that's for people that consume the data, which is typically the sales team or the CS team, that is supported by revenue operations. What does trust in data imply, or what does it mean in this case?
Yeah, to me, I mean, it's even for me and working with our data
Right.
teams. I think we see it both ways. Like for instance, we put out a biweekly report that is just kind of, we used to call it a WBR, like our weekly business review. We were sending out on a weekly framework, but we've changed it I mean, the dashboard's always live, but we changed it to a biweekly cadence. And we go through that with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that the data is right. A lot, you can run into syncing issues, you can run into things not being refreshed in Snowflake, and it really takes eyes to also make sure when it gets to a go-to-market or sales leader that it is validated. And so, I was always in the camp of the data doesn't lie, but there can be things that, make the data not right. And a lot of times I feel like there has to be a good set of eyes and a team, working to make sure that when it gets to the person that is actually going to be consuming it, it is validated. Because if you lose that trust, then all this time and effort and the focus of this team ends up not being as valuable.
Got it. So, coming back to your point about the data doesn't get synced or gets refreshed, et cetera, and that might lead to inaccuracies. I want to double click a little bit from a technology standpoint into that. And, really a lot of times companies are really trying, like this idea of a customer source of truth, right? So this is, it's been called
Yep.
Customer 360 by Salesforce in the early days.
Yep.
It's, customer source of truth. There's a bunch of different technologies that are
Mhm.
out there that are designed to sort of solve that problem. It's still not, I wouldn't consider that a solved issue yet, because I feel like there's still so much resource and data engineering effort that's being applied to the problem. And it doesn't feel like there's a good solution in the market today that addresses it. How do you see it? From your lens. Of course, you guys have Snowflake and you have a whole data infrastructure. You talked about it last time. We'll get into that in a bit. But
Yep.
how do you see, why is this such a hard problem to get a clean view of your customer? What are some of the challenges that you see in that process?
$1 million question, and it gives us a lot of heartache, and it gives us, I mean, it's been heartache at every company that I've been at. So if I had the $1 million solution, I would probably be on a beach somewhere. But I think there's so many systems, and it's finding the balance of what is the main source that we're going to use, and then what other sources are we using to iterate on that data or enhance that data. And sometimes I don't think that's nailed, because it all kind of piecemeals together, and then you get an output, which is with like Snowflake, and then it's feeding the BI tools. So I think sometimes that you have to take a step back to say, okay, like what are we relying on as our is it billing data? Is it Salesforce data? Like what are we relying on? And then what data points are we going to use from other systems to enhance that? But also like there needs to, and this is something I was just talking to my team about before we hopped on, is there needs to be a check and balance. And I don't know if most companies invest in that. Some of the bigger people probably do. I'm sure Salesforce has someone or a team that is really administering the data to make sure that it's accurate before it's moving into a data warehouse, etc. But at LivePerson, we don't. And so I'm in the process of standing up a rec for someone to administer the data, because a lot of times our data teams, they're focused on the process, not usually the distribution of the data, but they're focusing on are the systems working to the process working to have the data be surfaced. And so then it's our job to manipulate that data and surface it up for go-to-market leaders.
Got it. Great point on the fact that data teams are kind of focused on the tools and the technology and the process that they're running, and don't necessarily always have the business context to establish whether the data that's being or the analytics that's being generated off the data is in fact something that you can trust or reflects the current state of the business. How do you see the world evolving to solve that problem, right? I'm curious, like if you think that there's a better way.
I do. And unfortunately, I think the only solution that most people are doing today is throwing bodies at the problem. And unfortunately, we're going to probably be a part of that. And I don't think that is the right solution. I think that there should be something in place to flag where there are errors or, pinpoint what the problem is, because we go on these fact-finding missions that take hours, days to see like, why did something do this? And then you get to it and you're like, oh, but, and then you're like, okay, how big of a problem is this? Is this right? Is this wrong? But it's usually someone being like, oh, this doesn't look right. And then you have to go on this fact-finding mission, which is exhausting. And then you come back with an answer, which, some people agree with, some people don't, depending on whatever it is. So that to me is always going to be hard to solve because there's usually a reason. But the reason might not always be what you expected or what you desire. And that's hard when you have different viewpoints and like, marketing could say like wanting one view and sales is like, no, we don't want that. But it's a balance. It's hard. And so alignment early on what are the goals and what are the expectations, and then aligning on like what are the rules of engagement here, what do we really want to see, and where is our source of truth to be making sure that we're presenting the right information that's going to suffice various parties that do very different things.
Got it. Yeah, Tierney, great point. I mean, perspective, I think, on this problem, and it's one that we are keenly aware of. In fact, the way that we think the world might evolve is, there's two aspects to this. One is, how do I bring the right data together and do it effectively without investing as many people resources into that? So a big part of our design focus at Immersa is, can I automate 80% of the data engineering tasks that currently require manual effort and disrupt the modern data stack in that sense? And then the second part of it is, how do we empower business users and business owners, folks in your seat, to ask questions of the data in a natural language, conversational way, not that different from how you describe you're using LLMs in your own technology. Yeah. So those are kind of like the two directions from which we're attacking the problem. And we talked a little bit about this the last time we discussed it. I'm curious, like from your lens, if you had to describe the perfect sort of data stance for your company, to where, like, actually maybe perhaps start with what are the data sources that you tap into to form that opinion about that customer 360 or that customer 360 view. And then maybe we can roll a little bit into, if you could wave a magic wand, what would the world look like from your perspective?
Yes. So maybe I might take the approach of like starting with your last question, because I think it'll flow into kind of like the sources. So to me, I'm always putting myself in, the lens of the field and understanding like, how are they working in their day to day to actually, break into accounts, have better conversations with accounts to ultimately meet the brand's goals, but also meet our internal company goals. And so if I'm a seller, I need to know who I need to be calling into. I need to know what they care about from an account standpoint, from a contact standpoint. And I need to be able to surface up that information and prove out like the ROI, storytell, have like customer stories, to be able to really progress that account through a sales cycle and ultimately win that deal. So that could be within competitive insights, et cetera. And so if I'm working from that lens all the way up to being at an executive level to see, okay, how is my team doing? Where are we falling short? Or where are we succeeding? Whether that's breaking into certain verticals that we see higher win rates. Is there verticals that we're just continually losing to a certain competitor? And being able to prescribe, do we go solve this, or is this something we need to back away from? And so if I think about that flow, and then obviously you have the engine of marketing also in there, and kind of that whole underlying pipe generation system. is you need to you start with surfacing up the right data on who we should be targeting. And we need that information from tools like Salesforce and our internal stuff, Zoom Info for prospecting, or you have Lucia, any of the big prospecting tools. Some data science on propensity or next best product in terms of pointing people in the right direction on what they should be targeting this person for. The contact stuff, which would also be from a tool like Zoom Info. You have a tool like HighSpot that would actually hold the content that they should be using in their pitching, and that has the competitive information to arm them with who they should be talking about or who they're up against, and why a company like LivePerson would be a better value. And then you get to like ROI modeling tools. We kind of have some homegrown ones there, but it would be nice to. I know there's some good tools out there for that. And then you see how you're progressing throughout the sales cycle, and then you get a customer, and then it's really important to know on that customer, what does their usage look like? Do they have seasonality? Are they not using certain features? And the story continues as you kind of go through this flywheel cycle. And so at an individual contributor level, it's all of that information streamlined through. Now we have Salesforce, we have all like our prospecting tools, we have our content management tools, and then we have our customer, which then we go into our billing tools, which all is then again feeding into Snowflake, which then we're surfacing up some executive level reporting on some of that information. So I think I kind of got to your full question on some of our tools, but that's really how I think of things. I try to think of the end user first, and then trying to figure out then where do we tap into the data, and then what would be that, where would that what data source would have the best information for those points, and then using that to tap into, which it sometimes is tricky because you run into sometimes discrepancies from Salesforce to billing to our usage data.
Yeah. Well, I think that the narrative that you just took us through in terms of the different data sources and the complexity, candidly, of a salesperson's role that they need to work through to get a good understanding of the customer at different points in the customer journey. That's kind of the narrative that you just took us through. It just illustrates like how many different places they have to turn to get answers to their questions about what's going on in an account and how do they approach the account next.
We didn't even talk about marketing in that, which is a whole nother, like the leads, the MQLs, Marketo, what are they engaging with on our website? Like there's a whole nother complexity to that, which also drives the engine.
Yeah, and then connecting the dots from there into the sales motion. I'm curious, like as far as like we see two different approaches in the market when we talk to customers that we work with, as well as people who are savvy about the data space and what they're thinking of. They're either trying to push all of that data into Salesforce and trying to create a view from there that is so that the sales team is going to one place to get answers to their questions, or they're putting it into a data warehouse like Snowflake and then trying to figure it out from that lens. So two questions there. I mean, one, what are the pros and cons of one approach versus the other, if you have a point of view on that you can share? And then two, is there a different response to which approach to take depending on where you are in your journey as a company? So, maybe one works early on and the other one works later on. Like, just maybe let's talk about those kind of two areas.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think it probably does change based on where the company is at, just in their seniority as a company. I think it's probably messy on both fronts. But most of the companies I've been with have been in business over 10 years, so I haven't. I don't have that perspective from a ground up startup, like where do you start? But most companies start with they have a billing system. They usually they usually have Salesforce, so they're getting Salesforce, and then they they start to get Snowflake to be able to start mining the data and being able to leverage it in BI tools. But I would say that to me, it's getting ahead of it early and making sure that you're spending the time up front initially to be able to run as you grow as a company, and not just like band-aiding. And if you do band-aid, which it happens, we're all gonna, like, every company does it, being able to circle back and figure out, okay, like we band-aid this, but like we need to solve for this, and going through the priorities to make sure that we're solving for the band-aid so that we don't get ourselves in a spot to just never rely or trust on the data and trust in the data. So Snowflake right now has been kind of the way we've been leveraging the data. I think there are some challenges before obviously it gets to Snowflake that need that we work very closely with our data team to solve for, but it's still reactive, and that's the part that is really hard for data teams like myself, where we're constantly getting into a state of reactiveness on why something might not be right and how we fix, and then how we make sure that we're updating to not have that problem. But you run into band-aids, and it doesn't ultimately generate the right thing at the end of the day, which is, I think, a problem for a lot of companies.
At what point did LivePerson make a decision to implement Snowflake as their data warehouse and source of truth?
It's been a while. I don't know how far into the organization they decided, but we've had it for a while. We have a pretty robust data team, and I think they invested in it a while back.
Got it. So now kind of coming back to the question of, like, if you could wave a magic wand and, you first actually just stepping back in some of the areas that you articulated as challenges, right? So a huge diversity of data sources within the sales domain, then potentially another set of data sources in the marketing domain, and then sort of, different data sources that you have to tap into at different points in the customer journey to answer how to engage them next. The solution today typically ends up being, for most companies, either to move a lot of that data into Salesforce, or as you described in your case, to move it into a data warehouse, and then Snowflake, and then start to build off of that. But the challenge there that you've outlined is the number of resources required and the investment required to build a full-blown data warehouse and ETL data in and transform and build models and build a BI tool on top and so on. And so if you were to look at this and say, okay, well, that's the state of the world today. Now, you're in a RevOps and analytics role. You step back and say, if I could wave a magic wand, this is what the world should look like in the future. How would you articulate that vision from your perspective?
Yes, it would be everything would be centralized. There wouldn't be all these disparate tools that might not talk together as well as they should. You wouldn't be reliant on errors in CPQ, or billing updating something that wasn't reflected in RevRec. It would all be under one roof, and it would be easier to dissect if there was an error, or something that went awry that needs to be solved for, and then there would be the data would be you could be rely on better outputs in terms of what do we just need to focus on, like this quarter, this week, in terms of output, because we're still going to all need to be able to digest this data. And so to me, the output is very important. But that also takes time for people to read it. So what are the headlines out of what we're seeing in terms of trends that we need to focus on, while also having the always on reports and dashboards that, the sales leaders, marketing leaders all need on a daily, hourly, minute basis.
Yeah, got it. Great. I want to turn the attention to one last topic here. I think it's been a phenomenal discussion. But this idea around data security and data privacy, obviously a big deal when you're dealing with customer data. How do you think about that? Like, and internally in your organization, typically, like there's a CISO team and so folks kind of thinking about security. Maybe touch on that a little bit and help our audience understand what are some of the gotchas there that they should be aware of.
Yeah, it's getting tighter and tighter, and I think we have to just be so careful of how the data is, how it's secure, how we're leveraging it, how it's shared out, because security is so important. Like I said, I came from Salesforce. Trust is number one there, so this was kind of in my blood as I grew up in my career. To me, I get the most worried in tools that we're seeing from like Zoom Info, like skipping Salesforce and then going directly to outreach. I'm like, no, you can't put customer data in spreadsheets. Like you need to follow a workflow. And so there's so much governance too that is important to make sure that stuff's not happening. Like even from like Google Sheets and making sure they're not shared out of an organization. There's little things like that that are important on the governance side, which you sometimes don't realize until it's too late. And so that upfront setup of the tool is critical, and making sure that you have whatever tool you're implementing or whatever system that you're working with is making sure it has the right security settings and governance to make sure that we're not customer data can't be breached or shared, or even internal company information. Obviously, being a publicly traded company, we have to be very sensitive in what is shared out, and it's important to make sure the right governance is in place, and that work usually comes up front.
Yeah, great. Tierney, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure people, as they listen to this, may have more questions that they might want to reach out to you for. What's the best way to find you if somebody wants to reach out and have a follow-up conversation?
Yes, I would love that. Tierney Didier on LinkedIn. I think it's just LinkedIn and then my name, so it should be easy to find. But I look forward to talking to a few of the listeners and building relationship. LinkedIn is great for that, and I've met so many people like yourself via LinkedIn and been able to have this connection. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time today. And to the audience, thank you for joining us for another fantastic episode here of our webinar series. If you would like to participate as a guest in the future, you have somebody in mind that should be a guest on this series, please let us know. You can reach me at aseem@immersa.co. Our focus is to continue to push the boundaries on how data is utilized and made useful for teams that are operating in B2B SaaS companies and customer-facing roles. And we're always open to a discussion around that.